Sounds like Europe. Cross-border podcasting.
Hello and welcome to Sounds like Europe, cross-border podcasting, a project brought to you by WePod's. I am your host, Javi Caminero. A few weeks ago, in the episode we dedicated to explain how the European Podcast Academy in Milan will be, we discovered that other part of WePod that is focused on trying to develop the podcasting industry from another perspective. You know, I always say here at Sounds Like Europe that at WePod we don't just make podcasts, and for this project, the educational part is very important. While the European Podcast Academy is aimed at an audience of experienced professionals in the world of podcasting, there is another initiative in WePod that aims to discover podcasting to the youngest. For several months now, WePod has been organizing workshops in high schools across Europe to teach podcasting to young people. The main objective is for them to learn how to tell stories in audio and to learn as well about all the work involved in making a podcast. Because I think it's important to make sure that they know that a podcast is not just a voice and a microphone. You have to find interesting topics, you have to think about them to develop these topics, write them, make a sound design that is up to the task. And this is what Cathal O'Luanaigh, Program and Communications Manager at News Decoder, WePod's French partner, tries to show to the students of these workshops. Hello, Cathal. How are you?
Hi, I'm very well. Thank you.
You have come to the studio to record this interview because you live here in Madrid, but you're Irish and you work for WePod's French partner. So how did you get here? I mean, what's your story with podcasting?
That's a very long story, Javi, to be honest. I'm Irish. I grew up in Belgium. Okay. And then I actually have a background in international development and in geography originally. I worked with several NGOs. And then I moved into, part of that work was educational, a lot of educational projects. Okay. And then I moved into teaching. And at that point, I was working in East Africa for a while, and I moved over to Madrid the year after. That's why I first came here.
And this was in?
I came over to teach mostly. I was working on several music projects at the time. Okay. In my spare time, I do a lot of music recording, and hence the interest in audio. It was already there. But really, it was teaching that got me here. I started, I suppose, in Madrid, and then I moved again between Belgium, England, Holland, Spain, Uganda, and somehow ended up back in Madrid about 7 years ago, again teaching. But really, I wanted to jump back into audio engineering, podcast making on the one hand, and music production. But it's a difficult industry to be in, the audio industry, as an engineer or as a maker, a creator. And so teaching was my bread and butter at that time. And then obviously things changed. The pandemic happened, and many people were losing work, and I thought, let me stay in this. But once I got out of that, I decided to go back to my roots, really, and try and connect all the dots and keep that education side of things, but work in the non-profit sector, and work with audio and video if possible. If I could craft a job that had some of that, then that was me. I'm happy. And luckily, a year or so ago,
it happened.
Yeah.
It happened, and you have that in global perspective that I think is very important for a project like WePod, because we will get into that. But you have already done several workshops. You have done workshops in, I think it's been 4 already, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe you're right. Yeah, 4.
And where have they been, and how did they go? Tell me a bit about it.
So we started in Belgium, in Brussels. We did a workshop there in a school with 14-year-olds, more or less. We have also done one in Munich, in Germany. We then did one in Madrid, here in Spain. And we've just got back from Slovenia, from Ljubljana. There are two more to go, which will very, very likely be France and Italy.
Okay.
There are all sorts of logistics involved, obviously, in getting teams across, and also just fitting into educational programs, making it worth the teachers' while, the students' while, and making sure you can be there at a time that suits them and that works. So,
yeah. And these students, how old are them usually? Like,
we've found that we've had a range. So the workshops, we have our format that's set, but we're flexible within it. And we actually came up against the challenge that logistics plays a massive role in this, in what age the students are that just can be available for originally a full day, but we found that a half a day workshop makes a lot of sense. Enough time to be able to get something done and to really get them excited and get an output and get them recording as well. Scripting, recording, and connecting the dots in what their story is. But then also it's kind of a short enough time that they would be free and able to be freed up for that time.
I think it's convenient as well to for these workshops to not be so long, so you can maintain their attention. They're like, let's give it a morning or two, not maybe a full week, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's one thing that, from the outside world, the idea of going into a school and going is, oh, that's great, you're going to go in and do a workshop and everyone's going to love it. But we're a lot of our team are professional educators and journalists, professional journalists, and lots of non-profit sector workers, and we know that when you're in a classroom, the reality of life takes over, and kids' attention spans are different these days. Video is something that they're really into, and anything that's not to do with book learning, but we're finding that in media literacy terms, these short attention spans and a move away and into so many interactive visual things and kind of using visual content means that we're almost worsening the problem. If you a lot of schools and a lot of teachers are actually moving back to pen and paper because they're finding kids are coming out of school and they're not confident. They can read, they can write, but they're maybe not confident in it. And so, us as educators, that's something that we go in with in our mind before we do the workshops and as we form them. But it's also something that we need to be aware of, that we have flexibility on the day as well, depending on what type of students we have, what type of needs they have. Then we're going to work slightly differently with each of them.
And what are the common points of all the workshops? What do you usually consist of? How do you explain to these students what WePod is? Because maybe it sounds like a bit of a utopic idea for them, right?
Yeah, so the common point really is getting in there and getting them to understand how podcasts are made. So we go in, a kind of a common structure would be, we go in, we introduce ourselves and why we're here, and we introduce the WePod project. So what we're doing, but very briefly. They're not interested in hearing about,
They want to make their podcast.
9 partners in 7 countries and we do this and that. Really, we can't have them switch off quickly. So then we start with just basics. What is a podcast? What do you think it is? Do you listen to them? Do you enjoy them? Yes. Why not? Why? And they're doing group work at that stage, and then they'll feed back to us on that. And generally, then we move on and just have a little segue that's saying, look, you do listen to podcasts, but actually these days a lot of them are just watching a long form YouTube video, which to me is it's a very different type of podcast.
Yeah, but it's a thin line.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of podcasting world has changed, but we're really there to talk about audio. They're minors. We don't want them videoing each other and putting it up on the internet. Whatever, they may do that in their own time, but we're not there for that. There are all sorts of privacy issues around that. So then it depends on the school and the program, But really what we're looking to do is get them to come up with an idea for a podcast. And that in some schools may be a completely open choice that's left to them, and they brainstorm it, and then we kind of guide them in that. Or in others, maybe it's something that they've been studying and that the teachers have said, look, we really need it to tie in. So let's tie it into, for example, geography classes. We're looking at population, we're looking at migration. Can we do something on that? And then they have a free choice within that. It's really important that they have the agency. Just like when, you or others get into podcasting, you want to have that agency of doing what you want to do. That's really, really important to us. And then once they've come up with that idea, the main focus is a scripting task. It's to tell them, we show them, we have podcast scripts, and we show them, look, here's how you make a script. That's something that I'd never seen before. I've worked in audio, but I'd never seen that background work. And that really gets them to think, oh, it's not just turn on the mic and go. There's a lot of work behind. And we show them, who works on a podcast and the different roles, and tell them, look, you're going to be playing those roles. And you're going to have to develop your idea. You can't just hand in the paper with a couple of ideas. Now it's time to write it out, script it together, and develop the idea further. So depending on your session, that can be very quick, or it can take quite a while. And our focus, we've found that it's really good to get them to record either a trailer or like an intro to the first episode. It just gives them that bit of structure. For others, if you have more time, you can move towards an interview structure as well, which works really, really well, because the kids themselves come up with the questions, and that's kind of their structuring part of things. But the reality of an interview is that it twists and turns and winds, and getting them to understand that that's what you guys as journalists across Europe are doing, and that there's a lot of thinking on the go that happens, and how to react to that, how to connect the dots, how to engage. It's really about also connecting the topic of your podcast, the people you're talking to, and connecting with them. That's a massive part.
And once you show them these different roles involved in making a podcast, you show them even a script, as you were saying before. Do you notice that their perspective changes? What they were thinking before they met these workshops, a podcast was, and what a podcast actually is?
Absolutely. It's kind of night and day for most of them, because you guys know that podcasts are really popular more with the kind of over 25s and 25 to, let's say, 40 or so market. Kids, we go in and we ask, we do a survey, and we ask some questions at the beginning and at the end. And generally, do you listen to podcasts? No, not very interested. They're boring. I watch videos, or I do this. A couple of them do engage with podcasts, but that's a difficult place to start from. If they say, no, why are you here? Make me interested. So then what we do is through the workshop, they engage and they think, oh, this is actually really fun. It's also different from their day-to-day, and it's something that they haven't seen or done before. And we show them, I didn't mention that, but we show them examples. So, Javi, your voice has been in all of those countries, but other examples, we had in Madrid, for example, Manu Tomillo, who's part of your team, was there, and that was fantastic for them to have really the face of this podcast or that podcast, and to have that experience in the room. We go in, we run the workshops, but we bring in partners in person, and if it's really impossible, then we make sure we kind of bring in video content that we've got and connect those dots. But there's a huge difference in what they think a podcast is and then doing it. There's also a difference in saying, oh yeah, I know how a podcast works and I've actually done this. Or, when we say, how do you interview? Well, you get a microphone and you press record, and then you record. Okay, go and do it.
Yeah.
And then you put them in front of a microphone, and
The
it doesn't
mumbling
connect,
is-
and it doesn't, and it doesn't work, and it doesn't do that. These are all learning experiences, and they're really valuable for the kids, because they're part of actually doing something that's, you know, in the real world, real world experience.
And
They're
they're-
things they can take in
Yeah,
other
and
spheres.
they're challenging themselves as well. They're finding some, maybe some of them, and I wish this would happen, in a few years' time, ends up with their own podcast.
Oh, yeah. I mean, some of them will, you know, some of them get into audio, and if they don't go into podcasting, I think you will get people that will produce podcasts. We do have that level of interest. You know, we did an intro, for example, in Slovenia. They have to come up with the idea for one intro or one episode, and then record the intro. And we had someone who mapped out 6 episodes and was just going and on fire, and it finished, and she was just she was just like, that was amazing, that's really good, I love this. So you do get that, but you have to remember that we also work with the people that are just not interested, and what they want to do is get up and walk out, or cause trouble, or play around. So you've got to balance that. But for them, the fact that you've been given a role, the fact that you now learn to connect a microphone, to connect it up to your laptop to record. Well, if you get into music, you know, that's the same skills. Yeah. The fact that you script, that you plan things out, those are skills that you can use, yes, for journalism and storytelling, and to map out your story. But actually, they're core skills in the real world, in planning, structuring, and you know, saying, I'm going to do X, and getting an output from that. And that's really what I find. The biggest thing is can we get an output? Can you leave with something? So in places where, because of difficulties with equipment or with access to certain rooms, or where recording every single group might be difficult, then that scripting comes in and becomes a really, really important part. You know, I have my mobile setup that we bring in, and we also, they can record with phones. You know, that's what they do. Really, a lot of them. Some places we have more microphones and more setups. Depends on the context. But then they have an audio output too. In some workshops, we then have time, and you know, with Manu, it was fantastic in Munich, but also in Germany, we had time, and we kind of, the groups were so active, and they already had some kind of knowledge, so we were able to do live recording, live editing, and they left within that morning session with a trailer. And having that, you know, they kind of, they're nervous doing it, they're not sure they want to do it, but when you then play something back, you know, and especially things like the adding in the music, getting them to think about sound effects. Yes, you can go off and search for them, and they feel like they're playing, you know, let's find sound effects for closing doors and this and that. It feels like a game, but it's not, you know. That's how documentaries, films, videos are made, and it's showing them that background work. And I found also I'm quite good with the inverted commas, the naughty kids, let's say. I've always been just at ease working with people that maybe learn differently. And I found that taking them out and doing Foley with them, so doing sound effects and getting them to record each other, running down the corridor, screaming, shouting, closing doors. You know, we got told off by another teacher in another room for making too much noise in the corridor. Doing that, then when they hear it back and they can visualize, oh, that sound, that was me working out there, and it you know, it felt fun, or it felt, I was nervous then, but it sounds good. It sounds good now.
Yeah, but it's great to show them that this learning and these skills can be learned not only within the limits of a classroom.
Yes.
Because that's what we do, actually. When we go to record a documentary, a very important part of the process is recording these sounds that the city has given us. So it's important for them to know that this is as well part of the process and not just, you can have fun.
Absolutely. And it also shows, some people love sitting down and planning and ticking off the boxes. Some people love writing and being creative with the script. And others like the recording part, and there's a place for all of that. And really our job is to show them that and to say not all of this is going to be fun, or maybe it is, but you will find something you like, and also you're going to be good at some of this, and it works here in the classroom, but as you said, it works in the outside world, and it's bringing their learning to life is really important, because you also find it even from the teachers that we work with, from their perspective. We've all been in classrooms that we just feel like any day job, we're kind of doing the same over and over, and for some reason the spark's not there and it's not very stimulating. Just that fact of having WePod, wow, who are you? What are you doing?
Like, it spices the things up. Right?
Absolutely. And if we can, we're at News Decoder, we've done podcasting projects in our own work, separately from the WePod work. We've got experience in that and have done it quite a lot. We find it's a great way of working on storytelling projects and getting young people to think about how the issues around them are connected to global issues, or how global issues are connected to the world around them, and how they can talk about that. So we're used to that, but then we need to adapt that for a classroom context, where if a teacher says, well, this has to be part of, or it has to be linked in some way to
the content,
this subject, or that to that content, then that's our challenge to do that. But to get back to where we started on that's where the teachers get excited too. The feedback we've had from the educators is, wow. And you go in and they say, oh, be careful of that one. Be careful. Those kids aren't going to pay attention. And those kids, and it's always the way. They have preconceptions that happen. But the kids know that we're an outside entity, and that it's exciting for them to have us there. And so they engage with us in a different way. And all of those things go out the door. And it's our job to say, okay, well, we're going to tick the boxes that need to be ticked by any administration side of things. But really our focus is the kids and getting them excited about storytelling. That's really, really, really important.
Cathal, it's been great having you here at Sounds Like Europe. I feel like I have been on the receiving end of a private workshop. So so thank you for that.
Very much.
But before you go, I would like to ask you a couple of questions about your listening habits.
Absolutely.
Let's talk to the podcasting Cathal, not the workshop.
Okay.
Cathal, okay.
I'll change my hat.
What's your favorite podcast right now?
Right now, my favorite podcast is probably a podcast called Three Castles Burning, and it's by a social historian in Ireland, in Dublin. His name's Donal Fallon, and he looks at the history of Dublin through Dubliners' eyes and through the stories of people who've lived there, going way back and then up to modern history, or modern day. He was actually saying there was a friend had written a historical book which is about the 1980s, I think, or 1970s, which to us doesn't seem like history, but to younger generations it is, right? Sure. But it's really interesting. He talks to all sorts of artists and Dublin, artists, writers, musicians, but Dubliners in general. And he's a fascinating guy and a very easy listen as well. I just find him very relaxing to listen to.
And what's your favorite moment to listen to any podcast?
My favorite time to listen to podcasts was driving to work and back, just because. Well, is that true actually? No, I think that was maybe music. I listened to more music there. I actually did it more when I was commuting on the metro. So train rides, metros. I listen a lot on the plane as well. So I'll always download a couple of episodes before a plane flight, and listen then. But these days, I'm actually, because my work life has shifted and life at home has shifted a bit, I'm still trying to find that perfect moment.
Well, keep looking for it, because I'm confident you'll find it somewhere. Cathal O'Luanaigh, Program and Communications Manager at News Decoder, thank you again for joining me in this episode of Sounds Like Europe. And I would like to tell you, please keep up this good work you're doing with the workshops. I believe it's a very important part of what we are trying to accomplish at WePod, and I believe you are doing it. So thank you and keep it up.
Thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure.
And to everyone listening to this interview, I've been your host, Javi Caminero, and I will be back in 2 weeks with a new episode of Sounds Like Europe. Bye-bye.
Sounds Like Europe, Cross-Border Podcasting is a WePod podcast funded by the Creative Europe programme. Hosted and written by Javi Caminero, sound design by Manu Tomillo, coordinator Alexander Damiano Ricci, executive producer Anna Ribera.